Our next speaker is Mr. Haris Gazdar, who's a senior researcher at the Collective for Social Science Research. He has contributed widely to social science research and policy debates in Pakistan and elsewhere, and has taught as well as conducted academic research in the UK, India, and Pakistan. He has worked in an honorary advisor to research programs, government and non-governmental organizations. Mr. Gazdar, I would request you to take over.
Thank you very much. And it's also very heartening to hear the previous all of the speakers previous to me. I will talk a little bit about how I see these cross-country experiences also. I want to talk about some research that I had done with colleagues across South Asia, particularly in India, on the condition of women agricultural workers and how I became convinced, and we were able to convince quite a lot of people, including important policymakers, that this was a critical issue of workers' rights, women's well-being, and the health of women and children in Pakistan. So let me actually then start quickly. I'll just give you a few facts and some of our findings, and then I'll talk a little bit about why the South Asian perspectives was critically important in both the work that we did and also the successes that we had, and also the successes that we hope that we can achieve. Then I will apply that further to what we've heard from some of the other speakers. Comrade Lucky Akhtar mentioned the critical importance of getting women recognized as farmers or as farm workers or as laborers. And that's really the end point of our research and the policy making that we were able to do. So I will talk to you a little bit about that. But let me just start from this, some data, some facts. If you look at official statistics, but those which are collected using slightly improved methods, you find that about half the agricultural workforce across South Asia consists of women, in fact, more than half. And moreover, if you look at women workers, women paid workers in the workforce, so in Pakistan, 3/4 of all paid women workers are women. Sorry, 3/4 of all paid women workers are in agriculture. So agriculture is a very important area of work for women, and also women are very critically important for agricultural work. Now, having said that, I think that what is critically important to know is that while labor force surveys, and particularly the improved versions, where they probe workers through particular questions, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So while those surveys give us these kinds of findings, and more ethnographic work gives us even more nuanced findings and more powerful findings than this, the fact remains that women agricultural workers are not recognized as workers by the government, by employers, by communities, by families, and also not by the women themselves. And a very kind of powerful illustration of that is that when we conduct socioeconomic surveys, and this is true not only of small focused surveys in rural communities, but it's also true of the large surveys which were carried out both in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, other countries, the labor force surveys. So if you ask a question about a person, and that person is a woman, and you say, is she working? And if she's working, what sector is she working in? The predominant response that you get from both male household members and the female household members, and perhaps guided by enumerators, is that the woman does not work. Now, if you reverse the question and you say, well, here is a list of a number of activities. Did person X look after livestock? Did person X take part in any cropping activity in the last month or so? Did they take part in any harvest? And all of a sudden it shoots up. It shoots up to such an extent that, as I said, over half the agricultural workforce turns out to be women. Now, this broad finding a lot of the work, a lot of the groundbreaking work in this was done by feminist economists. But interestingly, the South Asian perspective took off. It was a major innovation over what was happening with feminist economics globally. So in the global north. So in the global north, what people were interested in was unpaid care work done by women. And what South Asian feminist economists brought to the table was that, there is a lot of unpaid economic activity which is otherwise counted in your national statistics. Right? So care work is not. And therefore, there's a big struggle to get care work recognized even as work. But agricultural work is recognized, or it is counted in the national income accounts. So it's a big part of GDP, as Comrade Nitya Rao also pointed out. And yet, the work and the workers are not counted. Right? So this was a big innovation which was brought by South Asian feminist economists, and it benefited people working across the entire region. A lot of the work was done by Indian economists, but it is something that helped everybody. And when we were looking at this issue within the framework of a research project, which was a South Asia-wide research project, we were able to construct a very strong coalition within that project across countries, and particularly under the leadership of Dr. Nitya Rao, who was working in India. She lives abroad, but she works mostly in India, on India. So she and I started thinking about how we can use this research project to actually establish certain analyses, both in India and Pakistan. We also had colleagues in Bangladesh working on similar things. So how we can actually establish this and establish a platform for policy change. So our partnership across countries was critical, not only in informing the intellectual part of our work. So we learned from each other's lessons, and of course, India had a lot more work done at that time than Pakistan. So, there were also similar efforts actually between Bangladesh and India. So there was there's a whole range of efforts going on across borders. Partly, it's also, it's very interesting that comparative analysis is seen to be somehow more valid. So whenever you have a research project or a research question, even a scientific study that can generalize across two countries, it seemed to be more valid and more powerful than something that addresses one country. So, that's an important aside. So we were able to, I think, build a very strong coalition within our research consortium with Nitya and the team in Pakistan and researchers elsewhere. And we were also able to establish a number of scientific findings which we got published. And the key ones were the following: that I've just spoken to you about how analysis shows how important women's work is and how important women's unpaid work is in agriculture. It's really a backbone of the agricultural economy in a country like Pakistan, also in important cash crop regions in India. The big part of cotton, the work, all the cotton harvesting is done by women. A lot of the vegetable harvesting is done by women. So a lot of the seasonal work. And when we looked at this carefully, we found both in India and Pakistan that women's work, so agricultural work was highly gendered, and women were basically doing certain kinds of tasks. A lot of those tasks were marked out for low pay or no pay. So agricultural labor is generally underpaid in all over South Asia. If you want to look for the poorest people in South Asia, they would be found amongst agricultural laborers. And within that, those who are the worst paid or unpaid, they were the women workers. And this is done through norms which actually set out that certain jobs are women's jobs and certain jobs are men's jobs. And the jobs which happen to be women's jobs happen to be the jobs which are the worst paid or unpaid. What are the consequences for this? Of course, there are important poverty consequences. There are issues about rights. There are issues about inequality. Just the sheer fact that a very vast number of people work well below minimum wages. And as Mr. Asif Akil pointed out, that in any democracy, and also as Bezwada Wilson pointed out, any democracy, if you cannot implement laws, if you cannot implement things which have been agreed by the legislature, then actually you still have a very long way to go, and that's really the case for agricultural workers across South Asia. What's happening with women workers is that they face, several burdens. They also now have the burden, always have had the burden of looking after the health and the nutrition of their families and their children. And what our findings showed, and I think we were very, of course, saddened to get those findings, but quite proud that we were able to establish these things in international scientific journals. And these things have some value actually in policy making. I know that people who work in the field and people who work with workers and unions, they know these things for a fact anyway, but nevertheless, it was useful to establish this scientifically. And we established scientifically that in Pakistan, women who worked in cotton, their health was compromised, so they had low BMI compared to the healthy norm. And very, very importantly, their children were much more likely to be malnourished compared to children of other women in the same communities. So not only is this an important issue with respect to women's rights, with respect to the welfare of people, the visibility of a workforce, but also it has immediate bearing on the health of the women and on the health of the children. Now, why is this happening? It's because women are basically being told to make a very, very harsh choice, a choice between the food security of their families. So they have to work, they're working because their levels of income are so low that they do need to provide labor in order to actually have just enough money to feed their families, but then hardly any time to rest, hardly any time to recuperate, and hardly any time to look after children in a society which is still not, where men are refusing to look after children. So the impact is that their health suffers and the health of the children suffers. So, it's a very strange kind of dilemma. So anyways, one of the outcomes of this was that we were able to persuade our colleagues, a lot of them are around this table. The National Commission on the Status of Women was an important ally, UN Women, other organizations across South Asia, and we were able to meet outside South Asia, unfortunately, but generate enough momentum so that a section of policymakers in Pakistan began to take this seriously. But the fact that it was South Asia-wide effort actually gave us some policy and political heft, apart from the scientific validity of the exercise. So I think that was very important. And we were able to actually change the law in one province in Pakistan and get a new law which formally recognizes women as agricultural workers and has a very broad definition. And interestingly, that law was possible. We were able to do it very quickly because our comrades and friends in India had already done that work, although they had not yet received that legislative success. So, draft law, which had been tabled before the Rajya Sabha at some stage, and for which Nitya had actually done some very important work, came in handy for us, and we were able to basically tweak it to our conditions, respond to our own findings, and respond to the dialogue we had with the political leadership. But the background work which had already been done in India was critically important. It's not the only sector. I mean, if you look at the bonded labor laws across South Asia, one country influences the other, and that's very important. So this was an important success. Now, I finally want to say one final thing. An area which is part of the charter. I'm very happy to hear when Rani or Khabar Mumtaz read out the charter. I think it's very comprehensive, and I think we should all support it wholeheartedly. I want to say one thing that we do need to talk about quite a lot as we go forward. Of course, working across borders means that we improve our work. So we understand more about Pakistan when we look at the conditions in India. We understand more about Pakistan when we look at the conditions in Bangladesh and vice versa, we hope. So from an intellectual point of view, from a learning point of view, it's critically important. It also gives us a lot of political confidence and also heft. The fact that, it's not just the experience of one country, but others, and it gets people thinking. Of course, at the moment, there is a certain myopia across the region in which a lot of these things become difficult. But there is another element to this. The South Asian issue The fact is that all of our countries that are in South Asia have a common history of struggle against global systems which imposed through racism, the colonial system, systems of exploitation. And those power relations exist today. And when we talk about workers uniting and people uniting across borders and improving the conditions of our people, in our own context, the work that Nitya and I were able to do, we have a very, very mini example of that. And I think that we should, but I will share that example. I feel that the fact that there were countries in this consortium working together on a particular issue allowed us to have a lot of importance within that consortium and actually garner resources within that consortium. So if you think of that research consortium as a mini kind of a global system, where there are organizations from the global north, there is funding from the global north, there are researchers and activists from the global south. The fact that people across South Asia were collaborating on an issue on which they were already working gave us a lot of power and a lot of bargaining power vis-a-vis our colleagues and friends in the global north. So a lot of what we were able to achieve was because we were not only learning from each other, but also we were building kind of a South Asian solidarity. So I'd like to end there. And thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.